Recently, I finished the anime Kino's Journey, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I was expecting. I went into it expecting a pretty chill adventure series, and although it was a slow-paced story, it was also one that went to darker and more philosophical places than I was expecting, making for a surprisingly thought-provoking show. From what I've seen, the show isn't too well known, so I won't go into spoilers, as I think this is a really cool show that more people should check out. Also keep in mind that I haven't seen the 2017 remake, and I'm planning to read the light novels. I've only seen the 2003 anime series, so that's all I'll be talking about. Like I've mentioned, Kino's Journey was a lot darker than I was expecting from its premise. Not to say that's a super bleak or depressing show, it felt like there was a bit more to it than that. It does a really good job at balancing a sense of wonder from exploring this world and seeing all these new locations, while also having a darker side which can make the show pretty unnerving at times. It also has one of the more unique settings I've seen for an adventure story. Most adventure stories that I've seen normally take place in some fantasy setting, so to see an adventure series in a mostly grounded setting was pretty refreshing. With the exception of certain cities and machines, it's pretty believable overall. And even the more advanced cities don't feel completely unrealistic due to them being based off of very interesting philosophical ideas. One of my favorite examples of this was in episode 5, where Kino comes across a city where people intentionally do pointless work in order to give their lives some purpose and just not be bored. This episode doesn't get quite as dark as some other episodes, but still a very interesting idea that made for one of the more memorable episodes for me. And there's many other locations like that in Kino's Journey. The only setting that I didn't really find as interesting was the country in the Colosseum 2-parter, which in general was my least favorite episode of the show, but that's really the only exception I can think of. I'll admit that there's some episodes of this show that I liked less than others, such as the Colosseum 2-parter I've mentioned. But even then, it felt like each episode at least had unique ideas, constantly exploring and pondering human nature in very interesting ways. Episode 2 shows this perfectly, with Kino pondering the moral dilemma about choosing certain lives over others. In this case, her killing rabbits in order to feed some starving travelers she's encountered. I won't give away any spoilers for this episode, but it really encapsulates many of the moral dilemmas in Kino's journey and how none of them have clear answers. And it's through these ideas that Kino's journey explores humanity at its best, worst, and all the moral grays in between. My only big issue with this series is I don't feel strongly about any of the characters, and I feel this the most about Kino herself, as I generally found her to be less interesting than all the things happening around her. There are some exceptions, such as her flashback episode, which was my favorite episode of the show. But besides that, their character just felt a bit too vague at times for me to feel strongly about them. I get that a big part of her character was constantly being on the move and never becoming too attached to any person or place. But sometimes it felt like the act may be a bit too distant to the things happening around her, making her feel a bit less like a person sometimes. She works for the story the show is trying to tell, but at least for me it did make for a main character that I was very invested in. As for the rest of the characters, I don't have much to say. Hermes was a bit annoying sometimes, but was fine for the most part. And the rest of the characters can only be fleshed out so much, with each of them appearing in 1 or 2 episodes. It's a show that's mostly carried by the adventure elements and themes, which I'm fine with, but it's just one that didn't click with me emotionally. So although I do think liking the characters a bit more would have made me like the series more overall, for the story it's trying to tell, it didn't bother me that much, and I still think it's great. Without spoiling anything, the last episode of this show wasn't quite what I expected, but I enjoyed it a lot. It doesn't feel like a super conclusive ending, which makes sense since this show only covers a small part of an ongoing light novel series. But even if there was a continuation, I wouldn't really mind. Kino's journey is for the most part very episodic with no overarching storylines. So the final episode for the most part just feels like a regular episode of the show. A similar ending would probably feel anticlimactic for many other shows, but with Kino's journey, it honestly felt like the perfect way to end it, and I really enjoyed it for what it was. If anything I've talked about sounds interesting, I'd really recommend checking Kino's journey out. It's a show that I have problems with, but they didn't stop it from being a very enjoyable experience that I think is very much worth watching. It was a very entertaining and thought-provoking show, and if you ever choose to watch it, I hope you enjoy. Anyways, I hope you liked this video. Whether you agreed with me or not, please let me know what you thought in the comments below. Also, if you'd like to see more videos from me, subscribing would also be very appreciated. Anyways, that's about it. Thanks for watching.